What I realized is that there's actually a lot of differences between writing reference content and tutorials, because in a reference content, the way the user of reference content consumes it is very different. Whereas in a tutorial, you can expect that someone's going from beginning to end. Whereas in reference content, they might be jumping throughout the page or throughout different articles. And I'm very explicit in my book, and I say that this book is not reference content. You should actually go from beginning to end, because otherwise there's certain things that might not make sense. I knew that if I used any files in the project that the learner is working on that included code, any kind of code, whether it was like code that you'd see in web development or data science or anything, it would alienate some group of people, because not everyone codes and not everyone writes in the same language.
Welcome to the API Docs podcast. My name is Laura Bosch, and today I am the very happy host of Anna Skoulikari, who is joining us from Amsterdam. But prior to that, she would have joined me from sunny Spain. So this is a sharp change. Welcome, and thank you for coming to the podcast as my guest.
Thank you for having me.
Anna, why did you leave the sunny Spain in the winter? And what are you doing now in Amsterdam?
I am currently living in the Netherlands. I actually live in The Hague. I don't live in Amsterdam, but the company I'm working for is in Amsterdam, and that's JetBrains. So I've recently started working as a technical writer there, and that is my new professional career chapter that I've just begun.
So I can hear that you didn't adapt yet the very Dutch and Belgian habit of constantly complaining about the weather and the rain.
Well, that wasn't the first thing I was going to talk about while being on the podcast. So
Right.
maybe not right now.
When I invited you to please be my guest on the podcast, that happened because you wrote a book, a published book. The title is Learning Git, a hands-on and visual guide to the basics of Git, published with O'Reilly. And you said that it's actually an interesting story of how this book came to life and the parallels that you have explored with your experiences as a IT technical writer.
So perhaps I can go back a little bit and just introduce a little bit of my background and how this book came about. And then I can talk a little bit about the experience of writing it and how that had similarities and differences with my day job of working as a technical writer. I entered the tech space through working as a UX designer, actually. And after working as a UX designer is when I decided that I wanted to learn to write code as well. So I'd learned how to design apps and websites and how to do the design process, but I was really curious about how these apps and websites were built. So I actually went and did a coding boot camp and learned the basics of web development, and then worked as a front-end developer. And that's when I had to learn Git, which is the technology that I teach. And through that journey, I realized that I had to learn Git really well to work with my fellow developers. And I realized that the learning resources out there were really complicated. And I got this creative idea of how I could teach Git in a much simpler way, using colors, visuals, and storytelling and hands-on exercises. And that led me into the realm of teaching Git. I made an online course, and then the book followed. And that also led me to discover that I was much better at the intersection of basically tech and communication, so explaining technical topics, than at writing code. And that's how I transitioned into being a technical writer. That's kind of how I ended up writing a book, teaching Git. And the book is basically like one long very long tutorial. From beginning to the end of the book, the learner is working on a hands-on project, the rainbow project, because I use the colors of the rainbow to teach Git. Throughout this hands-on learning experience, they're learning all the different features of Git. That's kind of what I've done. And as you can imagine, it's technical writing in some sense, but it's very different than writing documentation in some ways. So there's similarities and differences.
Who was your original audience for the online course to learn Git? And did that change over time? And then how did you end up deciding to create a static manual for something such as Git? Is that because of the learning habits of your audience?
So, to be honest, the audience for the online course and for any of my Git teaching material was myself. It was me on that very first day at the coding boot camp, when we had to, or well, I guess it was 1 week in that we had learned Git, but it was just me at the beginning of learning how to code and basically having to learn Git. And I'd wish that this resource had existed to teach me Git in a more simple way and a more approachable way. I initially thought, okay, so this online course slash book will be for coding bootcamp students. The audience has changed. I've realized how many more people need to learn Git. So this ranges from technical writers, which back when I did the coding bootcamp, I didn't even know this was a profession. So, and then anyone writing code, web developers, front-end developers, back-end developers, data scientists, even mechanical engineers I've discovered use Git, even some UX designers. So the audience is actually quite vast. And the thing is that when I was building the online course, I actually wanted to write the book. I already knew that I wanted to write the book, but I knew that the barrier to entry to write a book was higher than the one to make an online course. Because to make an online course, at least the barrier to entry to write a book that would be published by a traditional book publisher, that would definitely be a higher barrier to entry. So I just thought, okay, let me make the online course first and also test out whether people like my teaching methodology and whether it resonates with them. And that was just me making keynote presentations and recording my voice while I presented those keynote presentations, with like animations and stuff and videos of my terminal, and then uploading that to Udemy. So that was really easy, and I didn't really need any permission or any contracts to do that. And then once that course came out and I started getting the reviews and the feedback and it was resonating and helping people, that's when I thought, okay, I can take this now and go to the book publisher and say, hey, I think people like the way I teach Git. I think I can write a good book on this. So let's go write a book. But that doesn't answer the question of static, how I decided to actually make this static teaching experience or learning experience. To be honest, I also kind of view the online course as a static learning experience as well, just because of how difficult it was to make those videos. So since it was published in 2020, I've never gone back and changed any of the videos because they took a lot of effort and it was really difficult to change them because, as we all know, in Git, each commit has a commit hash, and that commit hash is unique. And so whenever I was creating a lesson and I was going through some committing processes and taking videos of my terminal, if I needed to redo that lesson, I had to redo every single video in that lesson. So actually, for me, the idea of writing a book was easier because in a book, hashes were static. I could go back and revise chapters as many times as I wanted, but that, yeah, that would stay the same. And one more comment on this is that I'm very lucky because I chose one of the very few topics that doesn't change too much in the world of tech. So if I had written or created a learning resource on like a framework or something, those change a lot. But the basics of Git stays yeah, stays the same. It doesn't change too much. So I chose a really great technology to teach.
Why on earth do you think that this did not exist before when the need to learn Git is so widespread? How is it not out there? I'm very happy
Um,
that it is now. It's just
yeah,
mind boggling.
yeah.
Like with all great inventions, why didn't the wheel exist before?
I think, first of all, I will say this, there are other amazing Git teaching resources out there. So
But you
I don't
needed
think,
something different.
yes, I think the one innovation that I've done, which I don't think I've seen anywhere else, although, like I said, I still think there's other really great Git teaching innovations out there, is using color. What I do is, for example, in the book, you're listing the colors of the rainbow in a file. So first you start off and you say red is the first color of the rainbow, and you make a commit. And then in the diagrams that I have in the book, the commit that represents that red commit is the color red. And then I teach you something else about Git, and we make the orange commit because we add a second line to that file saying orange is the second color of the rainbow. And so what that allows me to do is I can refer to commits using the colors. So the red commit or the orange commit or the purple
Mm,
commit
okay.
without having, actually there's no purple, but anyway, that's not a color in the rainbow. There's indigo and violet. Sorry. But I can refer to the commits really easily without having to refer to commit hashes. And if you just
Uh-huh.
think of a commit hash, like 40 characters, even if you just mention the 7 first characters of a commit hash, it's so complicated and it just convolutes things. So I think it was a combination of using those colors and also the diagrams. I've created a Git diagram which shows the local repository, working directory, staging area, and commit history, and the project directory. And it's kind of an innovative diagram. It's no one's kind of depicted things or illustrated things in the way that I have. And lastly, also another very important thing is that I make things tangible. So I actually take the learner and we go inside the .git folder and we look at the index file, which represents the staging area. And we look at the objects folder, which is sort of an approximation of the commit history. And through that process, then I build that Git diagram, that visual diagram. So I think that these creative ideas came to me because I had influences from other areas. For example, the UX design. So I was someone that was really thinking about what's the user experience of someone learning this technology and what's unfamiliar to them? What do we have to make familiar? What do we need to make tangible? How can we visualize things? And I think perhaps when you haven't been influenced by those disciplines of UX design or other disciplines, then maybe you don't think of these things when you're teaching something. Also, maybe I really struggle. Technical things don't come naturally to me. So sometimes when you struggle more, you're better at teaching something because you know what's going to be hard for other people to learn, maybe. So I guess those are a couple of my theories as to why this came about.
Where do you see taking your experience with teaching it? Is there a next level? I'm thinking like, the book Git for Teams. Is that also in the making for you?
To be honest, I don't know what the future holds. At the moment, I'm on a break. I'm just onboarding and adjusting to my new position and to my new life in a new country. Well, I've lived in the Netherlands before, so it's not a completely new country, but it's a new chapter. So I don't know what the future holds. It is what it is right now, the book that exists right now, but I do not make promises about the future.
And this learning path, the tutorial, as I understood, it also came up in the recent Amsterdam Meetup group,
Mhm.
Technical Content Writers, organized by JetBrains, where you currently work. Did something come up there that you haven't thought about before?
Um, Let me think. Was there anything that came up? I don't think so. We mainly I gave people a taste of my teaching approach, and then we did a Q&A about my experience of writing the book. So not so
Mhm,
much.
mhm. What I understand is from creating this teaching approach and working it out into a comprehensive book from beginning to end, that must have massively changed your way of approaching technical writers tasks as well. How do you
Mm.
see that coming back in the current tutorial writing or other tasks that you have?
Okay, so this kind of touches upon the topic of what were the similarities and what were the differences between writing this technical book and actually technical writing or being a documentarian in a company. Because to be honest, I don't know if it's really affected my work in my day job that much. Because as we were chatting before, writing documentation changes all the time. You can update it at any point in time. And also, usually the product that you're writing about is constantly evolving and changing. And like I mentioned, since I only teach Git basics, the basics of Git stay pretty much the same. I didn't go over any like advanced features or niche features that might change in the future. For example, one of the decisions I had to make in my book, because it's static, is that I have not a single screenshot in my entire book because I thought I won't be able to update this. So the minute the book is published, if it contains a screenshot, it's already out of date. Whereas, yeah, when you're writing documentation, you have screenshots or you have other visual elements that are going to change and you need to update them. What I realized is that there's actually a lot of differences between writing reference content and tutorials. Because in a reference content, the way the user of reference content consumes it is very different. Whereas in a tutorial, you can expect that someone's going from beginning to end. Whereas in reference content, they might be jumping throughout the page or throughout different articles. And I'm very explicit in my book, and I say that this book is not reference content. You should actually go from beginning to end because otherwise there's certain things that might not make sense. And I have a slightly interesting story regarding that, which is that at some point throughout the process of working with my publisher, we realized, what if somebody has read the entire book and they just want to revise one chapter, like chapter 8, and there's I think 12 chapters in the book. What do they do? Are they going to have to go through chapters 1 through 8 just to get to the project state to be able to go through chapter 8? And that was a whole adventure where basically we've created an entire appendix, which gives you like the minimum amount of tasks you can do to get your project to the state that it needs to be able to start off at any given chapter in the book. But yeah, anyway, that was a bit of a rabbit hole.
And for those that you asked to check, how is the experience going through the learning pathway that you have created? How did you select your testers?
Honestly, I kind of just put it out there that I was open to testers and I accepted anyone that was willing to be a user tester. And I used coding communities such as CodeBar. They have a Slack and it's a coding community that helps various groups of people enter the tech space. And I just would post on these coding communities and say, hi, I'm writing a book teaching Git. Is anyone interested in being a user tester? And this was great because I got such a variety of people. I got people from ranging in ages from 18 to 60, people ranging in professions, ranging in experience levels, because I also got beginner people that were learning to code or learning to use Git, and then also people that were like coding mentors. So they were experienced developers, but they still wanted to see how I taught and to give me feedback on the content, also for accuracy and make sure, it gets some technical review and that everything in the book is accurate. Yeah.
And this was out of community goodwill and help, or did you offer something?
Honestly, it was kind of just a win-win situation. They got a free learning resource, which later would no longer be free, and I got feedback. I didn't actually have to offer anything other than you get to basically preview a book that's going to come out soon.
Did you have to give people specifics about what kind of review you're expecting? So not everyone
Mm,
is a trained book reviewer, and we're talking about a book here.
yeah, yeah.
How did you ask them, like, okay, what am I actually expecting from you?
This is a really good question, and nobody's asked me this. So I need to think back to what I did around this. I think I just created a brief description of what it was that I was looking for. And I think I just told them any time in the book where you find something confusing or you get a little stuck, please add a comment and just tell me. And this led to various reviews. Certain people were extremely detailed, other people weren't as detailed. To be honest, I think though that the amount of detail that people gave in their reviews didn't have so much to do with being an experienced reviewer or not. It had more to do with how much time do you have in your life in that moment in time to go really detailed or not. But it turns out that most people were really like whether they had experience or not, they were really good at being able to tell me whether something made sense or something didn't.
Are you planning on writing a second book after your break?
I think I will continue writing books, but I am not 100% sure if they're going to be technical or if I'll also explore other topics.
Mhm.
So we'll have to see what comes out of my creative project break. But yeah, the creative journey is always a spicy one.
Have you thought of adapting the same to a much, much younger demographic?
Oh, that's a really good question. So at the moment, I'm actually exploring whether my book could serve high school students. I don't know if I would go any younger than that because I have actually been speaking with high school computer science teachers and just actual tech educators in schools, ranging from kindergarten or wherever in the world you are. That's not called kindergarten, but ranging from when kids start school to when they finish school, and it doesn't seem like Git is something that students are learning before high school, at least not according to the conversations I've had up until now.
Yeah,
So I
yeah,
think
yeah.
for the time being, I don't think I'll be adapting the Git content to a younger audience. But who knows? Maybe in 5 or 10 years, younger people, even younger kids are learning Git. So then maybe I could consider that. But to be fair, because I use the colors of the rainbow to teach Git, I don't know how many alterations would be needed to make it accessible to a younger
I
audience.
did think about young teenagers.
Ah, okay, okay, that's what you meant. Okay, great. I went a bit further down. Oh yeah, so I'm exploring whether it can serve that audience and be helpful to them. And according to some of the conversations I've had, it might. So let's see. If anyone out there has daughters or sons or friends or people they know in high school that are learning to code, feel free to, mention it.
I have two, and they had the recent experience of, well, recent and older experience of trying to join these. Okay, learn programming, but I feel that there is, or we didn't find it, there is a gap for children of this age who have a really high capacity for logical understanding, much, much higher than children of 8 years old, say. But there's no program that exists for them. I haven't found it yet. The ones that they find that welcomes children to learn coding, they said like, "Mama, this was so boring. It's just, oh,
Yeah.
it's not difficult enough. There's no challenge."
So maybe there's a bit of a gap in the market for resources for kind of that teenage, high school age range where you don't want something too difficult and too unapproachable and complicated, but you also don't want to be playing with Scratch, which I guess is what
Yeah.
they kind of do in middle school. It's this program with the cat.
These are the same kids who learn trigonometry and
Yeah,
philosophy and
yeah.
Latin. They learn three new languages at the same time. They have the capacity, but if they are bombarded with real life tech references, they will not get that because they don't work in tech.
I really like that you bring this up because this goes back to why I decided to use the colors of the rainbow to teach this technology. Because I knew that if I used any files in the project that the learner is working on that included code, any kind of code, whether it was like code that you'd see in web development or data science or anything, it would alienate some group of people because not everyone codes and not everyone writes in the same language. So I realized that the only way to make this book and this learning experience open to anyone was to just use text and make it something very, very simple. And that way it democratizes the access to this information. And yeah, like you said, if you don't have experience working in a company, then there's going to be so many software terms, software processes, tech processes that you just don't know. And when you're learning a new thing, you don't need to layer on top of it a bunch of other convoluting, confusing concepts. So yeah, you make a really good point.
What kind of segues did you get into while you were thinking about this? What's the dead end that you had to cut off because it was too much? What are the parts of Git that you thought would be part of the basics and then you decided like, nah.
That's a good question, Laura. To be honest, I am such a strict minimalist that there were no extra bits that I had to cut off. I actually was so strict that I had to add things on when I realized, oh, you know what? This needs to be covered as well, because then maybe it's really missing if it's not there. Like we added the section on pull requests, and I'm pretty sure that pull requests may not have been part of the initial plan. But then I was like, I have to include pull requests. So, well, or merge requests, depending on which tool you use.
Did
Um,
your testers say so too?
I
Did
th-
this come from the testers? Like, why is that missing?
did it come from the testers, or did it come from my own revisions, or did it come from conversations? The origins of that chapter shall remain a mystery because I cannot remember. I'm pretty sure that it just came from me going through the content and realizing that it's just, if this isn't here, it doesn't make sense. I think one of the reasons I didn't want to include it was because I wanted to avoid screenshots, but I was able to just make diagrams of what it would look like on the hosting service that you will be using. But yeah, so to answer your question, there were no parts I had to cut off. I was very, very strict. There were maybe a couple things that I thought, maybe I'll put this in there. For example, I do remember thinking git stash. I was like, maybe I can include a git stash, but I decided not to. The book is very, very lean. It really is the bare basics.
Could you repeat the title again? When where can people find it? And if there is a not printed but maybe digital version of the book available?
Yeah, so the book is Learning Git, a hands-on and visual guide to the basics of Git. You can find it online anywhere, Amazon and all the other kind of online book providers. If you do buy it on Amazon, please leave me a review. I love reviews and I don't get many of them. But anyways, so you can get it. And then online, so there's three ways of consuming the book. You can either buy a physical book, you can buy an ebook, Or if you work at a company that has an O'Reilly O'Reilly online learning platform subscription, then you can just read it there for free. Like for many people, they'll work at companies that have this subscription, and then you can just read it online for free. I also have a link that gives people 30-day free access to the O'Reilly online learning platform, and so you can read the book for free in 30 days, and then and you don't even have to unsubscribe because it doesn't automatically subscribe you. But those are the 3 ways of consuming the book at the moment.
Mhm. Thank you. If somebody was perhaps inspired to write their own book, what advice would you give them?
Well, first of all, user test. I think we'll go back to that. Let's circle back to that. User test. I wrote the first, well, I wrote the entire first draft of the book without any images or visuals. And then I did the first 4 chapters with the visuals, and I user tested those first 4 chapters before I continued doing the rest of the book. Because I was like, I should check if this does even resonates with people. I was lucky. It did resonate with people. And then I wrote the rest of the book. So my number one thing would be user test. And the second thing I think I would say is just make sure you really, 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 really want to write a book because it's a lot of work. I think I've reread my book more than 200 times. I've had like a bajillion drafts. So I'd say 1, make sure you actually really want to write a book. And 2, user test, get feedback, put it in people's hands and see what they have to say about it, especially with a technical book. It's not the same with other books. You know, sometimes people have like a novel or something like that, and it's a bit different. But I think with a technical book, it's almost like an app. You can write a technical book the way you develop an app. You make a prototype, and then you user test, and then you get feedback, and then you iterate the prototype. So yeah, I think that's what I'd say.
Anna, thank you very much. I hope you get a lot of very, very happy Git learners and a lot of good feedback on Amazon. And thank you for telling us how this was written. And I wish you a lot of success in your career further.
Thank you, Laura. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the API Docs podcast. We thank our colleagues at Pronovix Developer Portals for letting us work on this, and the entire API community for all of the mutual support and sharing of experiences that you give each other. Do you have a topic or guest that you would like us to spotlight? Drop a note at podcast@pronovix.com. If you go to the website api.docs.org, you can find the recaps and recordings of past API Docs conferences, as well as the upcoming program. Until next time, be well.